Hey, my name's Ben Marks. I've been doing open source e-commerce specifically for almost 21 years. Started out with OS commerce. The OS stands for open source. I didn't really know what open source was, though, until I got into the Magento world in 2008. I made the joke before. It's like literally, I'd go back and co-found Magento. I think there's a lot of value in open source, simply connecting with the other people involved in a community. Every person that comes into an open source community has the ability to have an impact. So from day one of the first things you should do when working in, with, or around an open source project is meet its ecosystem and figure out where you can deliver value, like where you can start to give back. And that may start with actually learning something in the first place, but don't be afraid to get out there and get involved right away, because just like other people's influence can impact you and your career, you could do the exact same thing for them. I will use ecosystem and community interchangeably, but I think you could say there's a bit of a differentiation there. Like an ecosystem is just simply a bunch of elements that are together in the same space. The community comes when they're like actively doing things together and orchestrating initiatives. You know, a lot of things have ecosystems, but an ecosystem doesn't mean like an intentional communal aspect. So an ecosystem would be different businesses and people in those businesses, engaged in some activities. It could be sales, it could be meetups or whatever. That is ecosystem. But really community comes in where there's a really well-known rules of engagement and people sort of conduct themselves according to these social mores that are, just specific for that industry. For example, in e-commerce, it was actually the Dutch Magento ecosystem that invoked the term of co-opetition, right? Cooperative competition, basically. And it's this idea that, yes, well, you're going to be dealing with your competitors in a space. So agencies here are going to be fighting for customers. There's a lot more value in doing this in a fair, almost friendly way. What the customer is not seeing is just agencies being completely cutthroat with each other, right? I think that tends to put a customer off on a given solution if it looks absolutely brutal on the inside. And then the advantage is, with that kind of setup, you have businesses willing to contribute knowledge, contribute hard-earned wisdom, and even contribute things that they know will make the world a better place, like they could be fixing bugs or doing performance improvements. And then everyone benefits from that. It's very much rising tide lifts all boats. Open source is really well suited to dealing with chaos at the edges, right? If there's a vendor behind a product, it lets the vendor build something, lets that something be built in full sight and ideally in full cooperation with the people who are actually going to be using this thing. And then they will also know specific verticals, geographies, again, all of the constellation, this like fractal face, the fractal edge of requirements that one core committee could never solve for, would never even know to solve for these needs. But instead you build something for flexibility as like its main feature. And then you let the practitioners actually use that flexibility at the edges where it meets the end customer. For me, that's like the most magical aspect of open source. It plans for this chaos at the edges in a way that SaaS platforms don't need to, right? Because they're going after a different kind of customer. The really interesting projects are the ones that have just these arbitrary and deep levels of customization that they require. And having tools in your toolbox that allow you to do that, that's absolutely amazing. Well, so I recently read a quote. Basically, the point was, in a successful system, and you could even think of it as a successful, like a system of government, society, but especially in a business context, the sort of destruction via re-innovation or innovation, like that is actually the sign of health for any ecosystem, right? It should be able to like fully sort of replace itself and reimagine itself over a few years. This idea that SaaS has commodified innovation. SaaS creates very specific spaces and can have an outsized impact very quickly by making a single change about their policy, or by getting into an area of the business that they weren't into before, right? So you can kind of make or break entire categories of businesses almost overnight. It's not good or bad, it's just how it is. Now, SaaS necessarily has to put things in a box. And we should all want everything to be nice and easily solved efficiently within a box. It would be amazing if any merchant anywhere could like spend 24 hours and have their exact vision brought to life. If you can, congratulations, and you are probably using the most basic implementation of a SaaS platform ever. That's a great place to be. If you have the margins for that and it just does what you need, that's amazing. But most merchants, when they grow even past the smallest of stages, they start to realize that their differentiation means they have to do things that aren't easily done on their platform. And then you have to sit there and say, okay, now I'm starting to build something with this tool in a way that it wasn't designed to be used. And you can quickly find yourself in trouble. So I would say that innovation, I mean, whether you would call that commodification of innovation, it's a centralization of power for sure that exists in the SaaS world. Whereas in open source, like the arbiters in this space, they're the ones who are empowered. That for me is part of the magic, because it allows people to show up and know that they can do things, they can do and build in ways that they wouldn't be able to over here. Well, without open source, I mean, you have a very few archaic vendors holding all the keys, all the power. I mean, that's, products like WebSphere. Smaller businesses have a much harder time growing, expanding, even within their local environment, let alone on a worldwide scale. Several years ago, I gave the opening keynote at a PHP event in Manchester, and just basically talked about a life without PHP. So PHP is the backbone of so many projects out there. Like, think about WordPress. Estimates between 50 and 70% of the content that's online is WordPress content. Now, if the web comes around, but there's no PHP, does that content still find its way? Well, I would say yes, something would have come along, but most likely the thing that would have come along would be an open source tool. Well, open source and open source ecosystems, it's the way of water, right? It will find a way to get where it's going to go, and it's going to make its own path. I don't see anything out there that shows me that a proprietary solution delivers the capacity to just organically expand anything. Facebook is widely adopted, but is a very closed platform. And so you have specific types of engagement. You don't have a lot of innovation taking place, in, on, and around Facebook. They've gotten to the end of the fractal map, right? It's all within their little box. And it can be an interesting way to lose a couple hours of your day. The least interesting thing about open source is the code. It's the communal intent of the people and the businesses that organize themselves in, around, and sometimes under the banner of open source. And I think when you show people that they have a basic framework within which to build and dream, they show up eager to build and eager to dream. I'm Ben Marks. Let's keep commerce open.